Well, Dell, thanks for coming on Voices of Enablement podcast. I feel like this has kind of been a long time coming, been wanting
Yeah,
to do this. I know we talked a couple weeks ago and then you went on vacation. So glad to have you back. Thanks for coming.
glad to
Excited to
be
chat.
back. Thanks for having me.
And of course, of course. Well, so for everybody, feel free to introduce yourself and then we can jump into it.
Sure. So my name is Nakhi. I'm the founder and CEO of Lead to Catalyze, which is a new company that I started. And I'm expanding on exactly what I want to provide in terms of services. But essentially, what I found in over 15 years of doing some sort of enablement in-house is that oftentimes companies really struggle with managing change. And ultimately, what that comes down to is with corporate strategic initiatives, if you're not effective in that, you're not going to achieve the outcome that you're looking for. So there's a serious struggle there. So between my experience with enablement and my passion for change management, I really want to help address that challenge that so many companies deal with through my company.
Something tells me we're going to get into the change management topic over the next 30 minutes, but we'll see.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, thanks for coming on. And as everybody knows who's been listening, this is Voice of Enablement, and this current topic we're kind of going through at the moment is, given times are crazy and there's recession looming, or it is happening, or something not good is happening, right? That's all we can all agree on. It's created a lot of revenue cutbacks, let's say revenue enablement cutbacks. And so what we wanted to do is create space for people like yourself to come on and tell us, how do we elevate enablement so that we're not seen as more of a support function, but we're seen as more of a strategic function within the business, to help us get through these tough times. And so I guess to kind of start it off, I'd love to ask that simple question, just at a very high level. What do you think will help someone who's maybe newer in their profession in enablement, or somebody who's been doing enablement for a while, but in maybe a different economy? How do we elevate ourselves within the business from that more support driven to more strategic driven function?
That's a great question. I think it does require some confidence, and it does require you to really navigate the relationships across the company, especially with the executive management team. So really making sure you have good relationships with all of the C-suite professionals within your organization is going to be a great starting point, because what you don't want to do is have them say, okay, these are the 20 things we've been wanting to do, and now that we've hired you, go jump in and do it. You really want to have those conversations where you understand what are the key objectives of the business. Have they identified those KPIs, those OKRs that they're really focusing on, and how do you align your efforts to those OKRs as well? So that's objectives and key results. So that's, I think, where we really need to be focusing, as opposed to purely program training content. We really need to be having different conversations with our executives, and a lot of it requires stakeholder education. So not just stakeholder management, but really educating them about the strategic value that an enablement function can have.
So align to the business goals.
Yeah.
Check. I'd say that's probably the best possible thing you could do.
Yeah.
Help everyone in the business understand what you do and
Yeah.
maybe what you don't do. Phil Putnam, shout out to Phil Putnam. That's one of his big things, is boundaries. And then also, I'm curious, this something that was brought up. We were just in San Francisco at a enablement conference, and something that was talked about a decent amount that kind of struck a chord with me was enablement learning the business, right? Not just like there to help the business, but like actually understanding the business, understanding the economic impacts, understanding, operating costs and, the revenue driven metrics, both, kind of the leading and the lagging. And so I'm curious, how does that play into it as well? Because I think in a lot of scenarios that I see, specifically like more junior enablement folks coming in, in the early in their career, they're being tied to, rev ops or even CROs. And that feels like kind of a scary, intimidating conversation, right? Like, are they comfortable having those conversations with CROs? And are you seeing that? Is that a part of is that a factor as well that you've seen in your, experience?
Yeah, I have a lot of people reaching out to me, especially those who are newer to enablement or new to a leadership role within enablement. And that is a big challenge. That's why I said confidence is going to be really, really important, because you have to have some of those conversations. And
Mm-hmm.
what happens sometimes too is people wonder why you want to know that information. So it's like, you're doing training and content, you don't have to worry about this stuff. So there is a desire sometimes that you see within a company to keep you in what they think your swim lane should be.
Yeah,
So you have to keep pushing those boundaries to open up the conversation and give yourself, make a seat at the table for yourself, really, because that is where you need to be. You need to understand the challenges of the business. And I'm glad you brought that up, because as much as we'd love to just go to our executives and gain those KPIs from them, sometimes there isn't that information. They're not really settled on the strategy.
yeah,
They don't have a clear idea of what is not going well. So we can be business partners within the company to really help figure out what exactly do we need to be doing differently before we jump into training, content, and resources.
I love it. Yeah, and speaking of that, obviously, I think enablement previous to the last few years has been kind of historically just lumped into like rep onboarding, right? It feels like
Yeah.
that's the thing that we got to kind of like get off of our backs, and for so many reasons. It's definitely a part of what we do, but it's not everything. And especially now, and this is kind of the topic that I want to kind of dig into the most today, especially now that onboarding is probably not happening nearly as much, if at all, as it was a couple years ago. The enablement function has changed, right? In a lot of ways, the responsibilities are changing. And so how do you see enablement as kind of a critical component to an organization when there isn't onboarding happening? Like, what, just at like a functional level, even like tangibly, what are some of the day-to-day responsibilities that enablement should take on and own now that onboarding is probably lower on the totem pole?
Yeah. In a way, I kind of reject the premise of the question, because then we're assuming that that's the intention behind
True.
enablement. And I
Yep.
know that that is often where a lot of people start, is
Yep.
focusing on onboarding. And, to be fair, with my previous company, that is what I started to develop once I'd gotten a sense of what the business needs were, because there was zero onboarding content programs. So that is an essential component, but what we really need to be thinking about is, how are we helping the business solve challenges, and how are we helping improve and optimize performance and productivity? I think that's
Mhm.
essentially what we're after,
Yeah.
and what our core objective is as an enablement function. So I think it really comes down to, do you understand what the needs of the business are, and having the right conversations, as we've been talking about, to really be able to identify that, and being a part of some of those key conversations to be able to bring solutions to the table as well. I think a core part of that is going to be really understanding your data. So whether you're partnering with RevOps, finance, both of them, I mentioned in a post recently that it would be amazing if we have budget to also hire a data analyst within the enablement function.
True.
Because what I've experienced is, even though I have great relationships with RevOps and finance, I don't get my needs met as far as
Yeah.
data reporting, analytics, all of those really essential pieces, because anything that we do should really be data driven. And it's not just focusing on the lagging indicators with the KPIs, but our focus is on changing behavior, right? So helping to change and sustain behavior. So looking at the different enablement tools that we use, whether it's conversation intelligence, sales engagement, what have you, you want to make sure that you're able to track, how are these behaviors changing once we do implement an initiative, so you know what's working, what's not working, and where you need to pivot. So I think that's another essential piece of it. And if you can align those to core competencies, and that's where you start, that's going to even strengthen that further, especially if you do have that reinforcement and partnership with revenue leaders to be able to carry that forward.
Spot on. I love the idea of an analyst in an enablement capacity. Because you're right, RevOps has their own agenda. They're looking at different
Yeah.
things than you're looking at. Obviously, someone in finance is looking at very different things as well. So I really like that idea. Or if you can have somebody on your team who's still doing enablement practices, but also, half the time is
Yeah.
also doing more of the kind of data analytics. That would be really, really good. I like that idea. First time it's been brought up. I like that.
Yeah.
So then to that, the change management, we're going to get into it. We have to get into it. There's a lot of changing that's happening. Like you just said, you're trying to change reps' behaviors. There are processes that are changing. There are, messaging changes, product change. There's a lot of change. I mean, the only thing that is certain especially in startups, is change, right?
Yeah.
So what advice do you have when it comes to that change management component? What's your perspective, and how do you maybe put processes in place to make the change management a little bit easier for everybody?
Yeah, I think it's first educating yourself on why it's important. I think really understanding behavior change, what it takes, what are some of the inherent challenges that you're dealing with. You're dealing with adult learners, so that inherently is a different way of absorbing information. It's not just giving it to them, but
Mm-hmm.
it has to be very self-directed. There's the forgetting curve, there's status quo biases, complacency. There's just all of these challenges that you have to overcome. And a statistic by John Cotter is essentially 70% of initiatives fail because either there's no change management or it's followed through with ineffectively. So
Wow.
really understanding what does it take to change and sustain behavior, that's your very first step. And what I always advocate is don't just keep that within your team. You need to also educate your stakeholders on what it takes to achieve the outcomes they're looking for. You just have to change the language a little bit. I was talking to someone recently and he said, you shouldn't really be communicating it as change management in terms of what you're doing for your business because executives don't care. So I think it's really focusing on those KPIs, tying it back to you want to optimize the performance of your team. This is what it's going to take. This is what we need from the revenue leaders. That's something that I'm a big advocate of, is shared responsibility. And this is what we're going to be doing. And also talking about duration. So what is a reasonable amount of time for us to actually expect these behaviors to change? That is going to be so important because I think, there's so much conversation around, let's be more data-driven as enablement professionals. That's great. But it doesn't matter how data-driven you are if you can't change that behavior and help them sustain that, right? It won't move the needle. So that's something that for me comes even before like just focusing purely on the data, is do you really understand what it takes, and can you educate your stakeholders and create alignment across the company about how you manage and navigate change?
You brought up my favorite topic, which is revenue leaders having to be a part of this. I've been saying this since I've been at GTM Buddy, so for 2 years now. I have been saying this as a career long rep. If my manager is not bought in, or even my VP of sales, if they are not bought in on what the enablement initiatives are, or just my own as a rep, my own edification, if they're not bought into that process, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to buy in either. Right. It's just, there's no way around it. Those people hold my job in their hands. And so, for me, that's the most important person in the company. And so I'm curious, because as part of this change management kind of process you just mentioned, it is getting those revenue leaders bought in. Do you have any advice? Because I know people struggle with this, and I know every organization is different. And there are a lot of factors, but just from your own experience, is there any advice you would have to people who are maybe new in an organization that are struggling with getting these revenue leaders bought in to their programs?
Yeah. I think it's not so much like once you've implemented that initiative that you try to bring them in. You have to really have them be part of the entire process. And before you roll anything out, that alignment has to be there. And there has to be a mutual understanding about those shared responsibilities, right? So we need to make sure that revenue leaders take ownership of the reinforcement, the coaching. You need to be able to provide some sort of coaching resources, frameworks. A lot of people feel like they know what coaching is. It's become such a buzzword, but there's a very distinct difference between feedback and coaching. So I think that's a significant part of it, but it's essentially starting out your strategy and how you engage with the revenue leaders in a much different way than coming at it from a programming perspective. What are the outcomes we collectively are trying to achieve. You have to speak their language. I think that's going to be really key. And then you want to align whatever you do to those objectives and really show how you're going to be measuring that, how you're going to be tracking that. And then again, that shared responsibility, are they willing to reinforce it? I've gone as far as not implementing something full on because I knew my revenue leaders were not going to be able to reinforce it. So in the current economy, a lot of leaders are being asked to be part of like every single opportunity. They want the leaders pulled in so we don't lose any opportunity, right?
Yep.
So it's kind of a super closer type of mindset.
Mm-hmm.
It drives me nuts. I don't love it, but I understand it. So we
Yep.
have to be realistic about what's going on. So, you know, implementing sales methodology is probably one of the most important things we'll ever do within any kind of company that we're leading enablement functions within. So for me, that was the initiative that we were focusing on. And I started with a pilot because I knew my leaders were not going to be able to do their part. So you have to be willing to stand firm and say, you know, maybe now is not the right time if I don't have this commitment from you, or maybe this is not the right objective for us right now because we have other priorities. Not every single thing can be a priority simultaneously, as you know. So I think that those are some of the things that I would encourage people to think about and do.
It's really good. I like the get them bought in on the front end because they'll have some ownership in it. All right. I've said this before. If you can get some of your best reps doing something, everyone else will fall in line. Kind of a similar idea, right? If you can get some of those managers bought in up front, kind of taking ownership of the program, then there's a little bit of momentum that I think can carry you through for sure. But then also you said something interesting, which just recently has become something I'm hearing more and more about, which is this like management enablement. I know I was literally just talking to a company this past week, bigger company, to be clear, 1,500 employees or something like that. Or sellers, I mean. So big, but they have enablement specifically for like, I think it's 2 enablers specifically over their management teams. I love it. Now, obviously that's not possible for really, really small organizations, but is there a way, and I'm curious, this is just a general question, is there a way that a small organization, maybe a team of 1 or 2 enablers, can incorporate some of that into the kind of the flow of enablement? I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say is there a way, I would say how, because you have to.
Yeah.
There is no way around it. So, you know, there's a Gallup study that I quote often, which is the average age of a manager, and I think it's probably lowered now, but at the time was 30, and the average age they go through any kind of leadership training is 40.
Wow.
So that explains a lot of the bad bosses we've all had and our own mistakes as leaders, right? So I've made my fair share of mistakes because I didn't have training until literally 3 years ago. And I've been managing teams for probably 20 years. So I think it's really important for us to integrate leadership enablement into our overall strategy, especially from the coaching side of things and making sure they know how to support their teams effectively. Going back to change management, you know, changing behavior is not easy. You can't force someone to do something, and managers have to really understand what drives your team, you know, each individual on your team. Do you really understand that? Do you know how to communicate with them, motivate them, and have them feel like you're their champion, not just someone who's telling them what to do, right?
Yep.
So I think it's an essential component of any enablement strategy. You can certainly curate content. So what I did with my previous company is we had 3 different individual contributors step into leadership roles within the revenue organization. And right away, I pulled them into a leadership development program where I curated content from LinkedIn Learning. And then every other week we would meet and talk through what are some of the challenges they're experiencing and really helping to make sure that they understand the core foundational leadership skills that are required of them. We can't take for granted that people just step into a leadership role, they know what to do. Just because they were a great individual contributor does not mean those skills translate.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that the path? It's like, I was a really good rep. Or actually, contrary to popular belief, a lot of people who have moved into management were reps that maybe weren't as good, felt like that wasn't the career for them, but liked sales and moved into management. So it's not always the best reps move into management.
It's not,
Often the best reps stay because they're making a lot of money.
Yeah.
Candidly. But that's what you see. It's right. A rep turns into a manager, and then they just kind of supersell, like you said, right? Like they
Yeah,
just end up, because they don't know what else to do. They've never done that before. It's not their fault.
yeah,
And they have a lot more pressure than I think they expected. Right? They
yeah,
come into this management role. They thought they were in a lot of pressure when they were in IC, and then now suddenly
yeah,
they're responsible for multiple reps, and they don't have control over those deals.
right.
So it's this like kind of scramble mode and panic, I think, is what happens a lot of the time. I think
I
it's really,
agree.
really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And I
tough.
think with leaders, in particular revenue leaders, I used to say the business development role is one of the hardest
It's the
roles. I think
hardest.
especially in the current economy, the sales leader's role is probably one of the hardest because they are being pulled in so many different directions.
Yep.
One thing that I do encourage people to think about if they have resources is to outsource the coaching if you cannot do it in-house. So if you want to
Mm,
implement any kind of initiative, and your leaders are not going to have that capacity, there has to be another way. It's never going to be scalable to do that all within the enablement
yeah.
function because it doesn't financially make any sense to do that. So if you can outsource it, if your leaders don't have capacity for whatever reason, that's another avenue that can be explored as well.
I like that. It's a good idea. All right. Two more questions for you.
Sure.
One is a little more tactical, and one is just fun. So you also mentioned something that kind of struck a chord, which was these managers are kind of resorting to super seller mode. We talked a little bit about it. To your point, there's a reason they're doing it. I don't like it, but I get it. And it's because there's this pressure. Every deal matters today. That,
Yeah.
people aren't just out there throwing money around for tech anymore, for whatever you're selling. There's just not a lot of money sitting around that's free game.
Yeah.
So since that is now kind of the new environment where every deal really, really matters, outside of management taking on a different responsibility, how does enablement take on a little bit of a different responsibility to maybe up level their reps or to help them close those deals? Like, are you still focusing on skill development as an organization, or like as a sales team, or are you every once in a while getting into the trenches and helping them close that deal? Or like what does that look like? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it makes sense necessarily for enablement professionals to be helping sellers
Sure.
close deals. I think, working closely with them, understanding their current challenges is going to be really important. I think what enablement teams need to do differently in this kind of economy is really understand that, one, there's a lot of stress and pressure on those reps. So we can't be like, okay, so we've agreed on 3 hours every month for enablement, and we're going to sit you down and do 3 hours of enablement this month. We have to be mindful of that, and we have to be more effective and efficient with what we provide and how we provide it. So it's as easy as possible for the reps, anyone who's customer facing, who we're supporting, to consume that information and be able to act on it. So how we have been enabling people, using learning management systems, having these formal structured learnings, I think we need to move further away from that, especially in that kind of economy, because time is money, and we have to make sure that we're as effective and efficient as possible. So I think being agile with how we're providing learning solutions is going to be a real big key there.
Yeah.
And just be mindful of the amount of time we're asking for from reps. Don't just do some sort of random skill building. It has to be tied to something you're actively seeing in the data that's not working right now. So maybe, revenue can increase because we decrease discounting. So part of what we need to be focusing on is negotiation skills and
Yep.
focusing on identifying value from the outset in the qualification process. So really be intentional about what you're doing and not just have random enablement content being thrown at people. I think that'll make a big difference in the current economy.
That's good. Focus on revenue outcome. I love it. It was really good. All right, last one for you. This is more fun. It's kind of fun. It's not, I don't know. It's fun because it's a different topic, but it's not fun because of the topic, which is times are tough. People are getting laid off.
Yeah.
Thus, people are in the market. They're looking for new jobs. Right.
Yeah.
If you are in the market right now and you are actively interviewing, what are some of the things, like at an organization level or at a personnel level, that you are looking for as like, this company has it figured out, this is somewhere I'd want to work, versus maybe what are some of the red flags that you would not necessarily completely stay away from, but certainly ask some hard questions about?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that we should be ready to ask some hard questions, and it's easy to fall in that space, especially if you've been out of work for a while, which I
Mm-hmm.
understand is not easy. I've talked to so many people who've been laid off and fortunately found their, next home with the companies that hired them, but it is not an easy place to be. So it's easy to want to accept whatever comes your
Yeah.
way, but be discerning, because ultimately how that organization sees enablement is how successful you're going to be. And maybe they don't fully understand it, but you see them willing to engage with you and willing to learn from you. So really asking tough questions like, what percentage of your reps are actually hitting quota? What are some of the challenges that you're experiencing? If there was an enablement function, or maybe someone recently left, what led them to leave? What wasn't working? One thing that I've been asking CROs as of late is, what is your expectation of your revenue leaders?
Mm,
That is essential to help enablement teams be successful, because there's an understanding that there's a shared responsibility there, as we talked about earlier. So I think that is a really important part. What is your go-to-market strategy? Are you product-led? Are you sales-led? What is working within your strategy? What's not? How are you trying to pivot? What are some of your key competitors? Really understanding that business and going beyond your focus around enablement is going to be the key to understanding, is this company in a good place to really be able to support this next stage of growth that they are aiming for? And can I actually add value here, or is there too much going wrong that I can't control? Because that's the other thing, is a lot of the work that we do is leading through influence.
yeah.
So if you
Good point.
have a company where they're really struggling, maybe there's not alignment across the leadership team, talk to as many people as you can when you're in the interview process, even beyond people that they're like, yeah, let me connect you with this person. Reach out on LinkedIn, get the real story as much as you
Yeah.
can. It really makes a difference.
I love that. It's great advice. Great advice. Yeah, it helps to have the insider scoop, right?
It does.
Um,
Yeah,
it really makes a difference. I mean, I do the same thing when I'm interviewing at companies as just an individual contributor. You got to know the
right.
inside scoop, right? It helps. You don't
Absolutely.
know what you're walking into. Well, Dell, thank you so much. This was awesome. I'm
Thank you,
um
Will.
I'm still jealous that you just had an amazing trip, but I'm thankful that you came back to join us.
Yes.
Excited to actually hang out next week in person. It's gonna be
Yeah.
fun. Looking forward to it for everybody. I guess this will be out after the SES experience, but just so everybody knows, it was awesome. We had a great time. You missed it. You should have been there. In the meantime, Dell, how can people find you?
Best way is just on LinkedIn. Message me if you have any questions around how to manage change at your company, which I get so many people reaching out to me about that. I'm happy to help. So reach out and we can have a conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. It was fun. Such a great conversation. I'm sure the audience will get a lot out of it. And
Thanks, Will.
we'll hang out next week. Talk to you later.
Sounds good.
Bye.